Everybody, this is the Nephew SIG automation meeting for August 16th. Let's get started. Let me share the agenda. Okay, so two agenda items. First one, I think it's, let's get started on our R2 planning is basically it. We've talked about this a couple times. One of the things we talked about doing was we talked a few weeks ago about a bunch of different issues. So I went through this whole list and made sure we had issues for each one of them. And then I added them to the R2 board just in a backlog. I didn't put anything into sprints or anything like that yet. And I captured all of them except for the things that were sort of coming from SIG 1, which we weren't sure about yet, right? So what I was just trying to capture was kind of the things we know we can start working on right away. In some ways, those are the less important things, but the things we can start on right away. So, and given how quickly time is going, I think that's necessary. So I think the next step is to put together a release team. I know Bala and Bish said they cannot, or they're going to be here like 30 minutes late. So I wanted to ask Bala if he's interested in continuing on. I think there's a value this early in our community to having some continuity in the release lead, but I don't know whether he can do that or not. And so then I think that we need to review the major themes from SIG 1. I don't know that we'll need to do it today. Do we have? I have not been tracking closely what's happening in SIG 1, so I know that there's been a bunch of work. Do we have? Can anybody give a quick note on the current status there?
Yeah, one thing that I know, I mean, I was in a call but on Monday we discussed. So there is a document that has a bunch of stuff in it. My understanding is that Sana wants to, let's say, finalize this, but I don't think she did that so far.
Okay.
Um,
So that stuff in there is sort of their priority list. Is that
So there is a bunch of stuff in. My personal view is if you want to tackle all of these things with the time frame, it's mission impossible.
happen? Yeah.
I think
No, that I
depending what I so I think there is two things here, depending what we want to achieve, right? Because one of the things that I see is that there are a few teams in there. At least the way I see it, and maybe other people can have a different opinion about them. But my view is there are a few teams in there that basically say, okay, we need to start investigating this area, right? And I'm not naming one. So let's try to, I call it prototype, or let's try to see what options we have. And maybe the naming is wrongly chosen, but which in my view is not really a core development, but is probably good to start or have that effort spent in order to then see whether this or this approach we could agree upon and would fit into an R3 or something like that. So there's a number of items in there that I see personally that are in that area, or that's my personal view. And then that is also not unimportant, right? Because so the way I always look at it, when we did, why could we do R1? Because we did a November part somehow,
Yeah.
right? So somehow you could look at this as a similar, let's say, approach. So that's what I personally see. And then there is it's a mix. So it's not all of that, but there's a mix of that. And I think, yeah, that would be my view a little bit, is that we could probably have people focus on, let's say, enhancing what we did in R1, right? Plus another team. Like radio is definitely a team I see in there personally. So run. and then there is a few other items which potentially could be like yeah, exploratory things to which could then lead to an evolution into the core product in the next releases or something like that. And I think they are both important, by the way. So
Sure. Okay. Anybody else have thoughts on that? Okay. Well, then, so what I think that makes sense to me. I think probably our next step is to, yeah, we can, like I said, take a look at um, the immediate things we know about, and then I guess we're waiting for them to finalize that priority, but we can um, probably, given the time frame, like do a yeah. I think Victor called it TikTok or whatever. Really, where it's like, well, this release will be more about filling gaps from R1 and doing the exploratory work you're talking about, Wim, and then we'll know what to do better in R3. So that makes sense to me. I'm good with that. Um, so that's around the scope. So these three items I'm showing on the screen. So that we need to figure out the release team. We need to figure out the scope, and then the schedule. And I think that I would look to the release team to set up the sprints and whatever they feel is the appropriate sprints, and then we can start to slot different work and manage it that way. Um, any anything else anybody wants to talk about this? I see Stephen has joined, so we can probably go on to his item unless there's like is anybody else interested in joining the release team? I know, like I said, I'm kind of hoping Vala will continue as lead just to keep that continuity for our first couple of releases. But if he's, but I'm wondering about other roles. Yeah, Simon.
Yeah, I would love to be part of it as long or as soon as we have something figured out what there is in addition to do. Yeah,
Okay.
I would be interested in that. Should I add myself to the document?
So let me differentiate between when I say release team here, I mean the people sort of managing the release process. Everybody's going to
Yep.
be involved in contributing to the release, who has time and can do it. So I'm not talking about, just to be clear on what I meant by
Yep.
release team.
Yeah, no, fully understood, but
Okay.
I'm 100% on board. I want to see a
Yeah,
bit
why don't
also
you
how
just
we ship
put
it.
your name down as you're interested, and you know uh, we'll form that team this week, maybe over before next week. Yeah, Tal.
Perfect.
Yeah, just to add a point maybe to the list. I don't think we need to decide, but for R1 we divided into these sub projects.
Yes.
I'm hoping, I'm really hoping we won't need to do that this time.
Right.
Or if we do that, we might do that in a more natural way. For example, there's an idea to have an idea that I put forward to SIG1 to have kind of showcasing integration on multiple fronts. So these are very different, a set of different topics that it makes sense that different people would work on each. So it could be nice to divide into these separate task forces. But I think with R1, we had a lot of, a lot of meetings, a lot of overlap people. In my mind, it became kind of stressful. So it's probably a good idea to have separate teams, but let's see how we proceed onward. And by the way, I still owe people a retrospective survey for R1. This is something I've been working on but didn't publish yet. Hopefully it'll be done soon, but that might give us some data to know how to organize for R2. So yeah, I'm just putting it out here as an agenda item. I don't know if we I think we won't know if we need this or how to do this until we actually know what we're doing.
Yeah, exactly. Like once we have the understanding of the scope better, then I think we'll be in a better position to answer that question. Sandeep?
Yeah, hi everyone. So for the scope wise, I just want to put a point that last week we, Stephen, Wim, and Victor, we had a meeting for observability, initial discussion on that, and we had some design discussion with all of us. there were some suggestions by Wim and others that maybe Prometheus can be used for initial point of thing, and then we can from there we can build on. So that's already topic going on. So just wanted to make sure that it is here and see whether it can be scope for R2 or what is the way forward. So we are, yeah.
So what I would
Correct.
suggest is create an issue and add it to the R2 backlog. So if you look here, I created a project for R2, and I basically closed out all the issues from R1 that that were done, and I moved all the others to R2. Some of these we may not do in R2, but I put them all in the backlog. So what I would do is create an issue and talk about observability, and then we can, like, in some ways this is too detailed, right? Like that's a big category, and I think we can maybe put it on our, maybe we have, and this gets back to construction, like maybe we have to have some.
It could be a big epic, and then we can group some of the stuff under that.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. So John, what I was proposing to Subash, I think is that
Sandeep.
Sandeep, sorry, to first maybe have a presentation on it, because it's such a big topic. Before you create the issue, I said maybe take half an hour on one of the SIG2 calls, like Steven is doing maybe right now, to discuss it, and then maybe discuss with the team whether or not and which pieces we put potentially take up or not. Is that not a better approach than rather? I mean, we can of course create an issue, but this is such a big thing potentially.
Yeah,
so I was proposing maybe first, because we had a call with a smaller team, right? And then we said, okay, maybe present it first to the bigger audience, get a buy-in, and then we can take it from there. We suggested Prometheus because that's like used a lot, but that would be just a implement or a
it's like part of the reference, but like
yes,
I think that
like a reference thing.
Yeah, so I don't mind creating issues all over the place, and they become just for tracking, right? Like they don't mean anything other than that, just so we don't lose track of it. But it's not really necessary. It definitely, we would need to have a discussion and kind of decide what the role of observability is in Nephew. Like I see it as it's part of a broader solution, but we're not going to be prescriptive about your observability. But that's, like you said, we don't need to discuss it right now. So, I mean, yeah, definitely, Sandeep, if you want to put an agenda item on for next week or something.
Yeah, I'll do that. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Subhash.
Yeah, John. So few weeks back we were discussing about the policy, right? And also when we will also understand also preparing the document, right? And also we are looking context around service assurance. So what do you think if we can include policy also an item for R2 and have some framework defined there as a R2 output? So I think that could be a potential item for the R2, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that, like, if we look at all of these things, policy and observability and service, like, we need to understand how we fit into the ecosystem of these things. And so I think addressing that and trying to understand that and trying to see how it all will fit together makes a lot of sense. I don't know that we're going to be prescriptive, like I said, about any particular things. Just like we're not even prescriptive about what Git provider you use, even though we are GitOps pretty prescriptive about that at this point anyway. So that makes sense to me. I mean, it all depends on right? This is a community, so what people are available to contribute makes sense. We just all have to come to consensus about how the pieces fit together, and what's in scope and out of scope for Nefio, as opposed to being what's in scope being how we integrate with existing ecosystems that services. So, okay, Tal, your hand is still up. I think that's stale though. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Then let's for each of these pieces. I mean, this is kind of why I do like to have an issue to track it. Like if we have just an umbrella issue that says, figure out and document and maybe create a reference implementation for policy, for observability, things like that, then people will be able to kind of work on them, and the work on them will be visible.
Yeah,
okay.
How to drive it actually? So let's say most of the, I think people will get dedicated for the main track, right? Main track items. But yeah, for this kind of items, how to proceed, how to discuss with the folks, and how to work on. You can just put.
Yeah, I'm not sure. We haven't figured it out yet. Like, I guess the way I would start is like you did a presentation, like all of those things. That's definitely the starting point, and then probably, we don't have a very we have our architecture diagrams that we drew now over a year ago. Like we and they have some of these pieces on them at a very high level. We don't have a good design proposal section yet. We talked about that. Like, I guess I'm struggling with the scope of how we address it, right? So like, okay, we talk about obviously policy and observability are important points in this. Are we trying to demonstrate, say, policy where it fits? Or are we trying to maybe we need to start with just a document describing, and maybe you have this or are working on it, describing, okay, here's where policy can fit into the overall framework. We have policy around, we've talked about this before, around like apply time policy with Gatekeeper. We have policy around config time policies. We have policies that we want, who the roles are and who we want to enforce those policies. The vendor policies for their packages, for like, oh, if you don't meet our policies, we won't provide support, kind of thing, right? So I think that starting with a sort of comprehensive, and it can be in our I would start it in an MD or in a Google Doc that eventually moves to an MD or something that we can include as sort of our official position on how one integrates policy and how policy fits into the whole equation. And then if we want to add something like that in our reference implementation to demonstrate some of that, I think that's probably the approach I would take overall.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but we can just to try, and whenever it gets mature, that time we can call it as a main track item, and maybe we can deliver in R2, I think.
I mean, yeah, potentially. Yeah. I mean,
yeah. I mean, back in like early R1 development cycle, we talked about inclusions of the design MD files onto a release, so we can have the doc and see what's included on the release. We failed to do that very well, so maybe this is the time when we're saying, hey, we'll have the design doc, and then if the community approved that as part of the release, we'll check it into some sort of main doc repo to know that this is expected to be part of R2.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of these, right, a lot of these things that we're doing, there's a lot of different possible ways. There's a lot of different ecosystems projects that cover different parts of these areas. So the question has to be, what can different stakeholders rely upon within the a quote Nefio installation? So I think it's a reasonable thing to say they can rely on there being some sort of policy solution, and probably we have to get to a point where there's certain aspects of that policy that are. So if I'm a vendor and I'm producing a package and I want to constrain the use of that package to within my tested limits and tell my customers, hey, as long as you meet these policies that are included with my package, I'm able to support you. Then I need to be able to rely on certain policy APIs and policy functionality being there in any Nefio thing, because I don't want to produce a Google Nefio and an Amazon Nefio and a Red Hat Nefio version of my package, right? That's what we're trying to get away from. And so in that sense, where I see us trying to figure out what are those, what's in scope for us to be prescriptive about is around, I think, that sort of consumer or API consumer model. Like, so that's the framing I would try with each of these things. With, we're talking about, we don't, at least in one of my issues, I'm like, I want to see it with Argo instead of config sync, right? I want to see it like, we have to be able to rely on certain behavior from the Nefio installation, regardless of the implementation details under the hood. And that's always really hard. But that's kind of the framework I would try to put the policy piece into.
Yeah.
So,
okay, John.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right, Tal. Sure. I want to be sure we give enough.
You know what? I'll lower my hand. I think we have more important things. Never mind.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Stephen. I'll hand it off to you now. Let me stop sharing.
Thank you.
And do you have the sharing ability? Are you logged in with that?
Well, if not, I'll log in as an admin again. But
I think anybody can share.
I think everyone does. It should be okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Can you see my screen? All right.
Yes.
So, Nefio SDK. So I think everyone here probably has heard a lot of people hyped up the quote-unquote operator SDK for Nefio. And the document that we wrote, I mean, not just me, that we wrote, attempts to kind of get a functional descriptions of our view of what this SDK is supposed to do. And we decided not to call it operator SDK because obviously there's already an operator SDK in the industry from Red Hat / CoreOS. And B, when you want to onboard something to as a network functions, you want to onboard network functions onto Nefio, it's more than an operator. It's actually a lot more than an operator. Operator is a recommended thing that you should have. But on top of an operator, there should be other components as well. So we would like to see tools that would be able to help network function vendors or other projects to be able to onboard the network functions onto Nefio. And it is one of the initiatives. So this link is a document of the SIG1 release, R2 requirements or whatever. And then item number 3, I think, is the operator SDK. So I would name it Nefio SDK for now. We listed a set of user stories out of this. These are pretty obvious. Hopefully nothing too controversial. So obviously we want you to we want to build. So the whole point is this is to ease developers and more than anything network function vendors to build the network functions on board Nefio. So we're not really addressing users in like telcos, but then much more in terms of network function vendors. What is your difficulty on actually getting something into Nefio? And then if we can actually make your life easier, that's actually our primary number 1 goal for sure into getting this done, getting this thing going. So one thing we talked about, we're not going to, I think Alexis from Red Hat and Daniel from Bell second that. is that they're saying, oh, let's not reinvent the wheel here, which is the case. I mean, I don't think we are rebuilding, a Nephew version of Skill Builder or Operator SDK. We'll likely be leveraging whatever is available on there, most likely Operator SDK from Red Hat, and then use it as the core. But what separates a Nephew operator from like a regular plain vanilla operator is that obviously the network function operators for Nephew should be reconciling against the Nephew set of CLs, well, the CLs that are conforming to Nephew CLDs. So the whole point is, naturally we may be creating a reconciliation loops that's already reconciled against a UPF, AMF, and SMF deployment. We should have a lot more, hopefully, moving forward. But for R1, we want those three. And the tools will be there to allow you to, hey, let's kick off, and you already have something, a reconciliation loop. The point is, it may actually alleviate developers from having to really understand the nitty-gritty details on how to build an operator. So this is already reconciling this, and maybe we'll just give you a bunch of callbacks out of this. So if it's just that, it'll be simple. Obviously, it's not. Even as simple as FreeFiGC, there actually is a vendor extension. Vim and I actually built that little config wrapper that basically bundle UPF deployments inside as a config extensions, and then an SM config. SNF the deployment would actually include this. So almost, I would be surprised if any vendors or projects would not at least have their own set of CLDs. Or other external configs, or we call extension CLDs in this doc. And the tools obviously would have to help bring on board those vendor-specific extension CLDs that the operators would use hopefully our mechanisms, which is basically the config graph, to examine, or if they want to create controllers to reconcile that too. That's up to them. But then for simplicity, maybe you should use our mechanisms first to kind of play it out. But it will be part of the tools. And because of that, we would also, generate that CLD YAML files so that we can install them moving forward. And another one, as a vendor, I have existing operators. So we did work with that, obviously, as Google. We did work with NF vendors that have their own operators. The natural way to do that, obviously, is don't rewrite your operators. So one thing that could be done is we use some sort of like proxy that reconcile against the set of Nephew CLs, and then it would actually then invoke something, gRPC, for example, to call into some sort of gRPC server that will also be generating, and then inside, naturally, that may be like generating a CL that is for your own operators. So I think, for example, Tau has something called kplug that could be something to examine moving forward. And then likewise, if you don't have an operator, but you have some sort of configuration management tools already in place that hopefully runs on Kubernetes, then we can also use the same mechanisms to kind of integrate with your config tools. And then by the time you have an operator that actually conforms to Nephew CLs, then the tools would have to be able to give you a bundle of the operator package, and B, we as Nephew as a system, not just the tools. So this is actually the extension piece. This is the piece. So there's a piece with its tools, and that's a piece where it has to go into a Nephew system. The Nephew system piece would have to also make lifecycle management work of your newly created network function operators. And because of this, you're also telling, via the tools, you're also creating this new set of CLDs for your vendor extensions. So naturally, in addition to packaging, so today, for those who don't know, the operator package is a separate package from the network function package, naturally, because there's a dependency between the two. It'll probably be that way moving forward still. So naturally, the tools will be creating the operator package for the user being the developers of the operator in this case. But in addition to that, because you are also, as a developer, you're also defining the CLDs for your particular network functions, it would also make sense for these tools to also include the packaging for your network functions package. The packaging tools for your network function packaging. So those CLs would then be included into that new network functions package when it's loaded. And because we have a packaging tools, one natural extensions would be if I'm going from a network function package, and then I want to put a network function package onto, say, Cloud Platform X, or actually in my doc is X to Y, then the tools would allow you to add additional things into that package. So you may be a network function vendor that wants to do that from day one, that you're publishing your UPF that runs on OpenShift, VMware, Google Cloud, AWS, and all that stuff. Or if a system integrator kicks in and saying that, oh, I've obtained this vendor's UPF package, and then I can use the same tools to start attaching what additional things is needed to run it on these different platforms. I'm not doing the porting, obviously. The tools will be allowing you to actually creating a more comprehensive package out of this. And then, this is, again, we're talking about this is not something we are building the whole thing in now too. Obviously, we're not. But moving forward, I can also see, based on actually some of the discussion we had on Sandeep refer to, we may, as a community, eventually start building best practice or integration or our view of integrations to other cloud services. And then we may be creating configuration templates out of those. And then those would naturally be integrated in those tools. So people can say, for my network functions to run, I would like to run a local Prometheus, or I want to run a Prometheus agent, and goes into the cloud. I want to run Istio as a separated cluster or multi-cluster, that kind of templates they can select, moving forward. And so those are the sort of user journeys that we would like to cover out of these tools. The idea really is, well, actually, no, I missed one, sorry. One of them is when you're integrating with Nefio, in addition to just workload clusters, because you're creating new CLDs, where the CLs will be included in your package, you may actually want, you as a developer, may want to add management cluster pieces, controllers, cap functions, that would be automating the process of injecting values into those CLs. Vim already has a very good tools to do so. So it would be great to also put that as a thing, take advantage of that tools and start integrating that, so that it'll be a one-stop shop for network function owners to look at and saying that I create operators. I can also see that I need to inject parameters here and there onto the management clusters. And likewise, if they want to write controllers instead of cap functions onto the management clusters, the tool should have ability to actually allow them to do that too. Meaning that it's like watching, package revisions or something like that. And there are multiple roles of modules that can happen out of this. This is the SDK itself, which also includes the operator SDK within the SDK. There's packaging tools that would be part of that SDK. And the Nefio system would need to have some sort of controllers running on the clusters that would at least be checking compatibilities when the operators are running or the controllers are running. Are they actually conforming to a particular set of CLDs at what is being supported by the specialization logic and so on the management cluster. So the first function is the simplest one. It's basically just an operator. So how do we build an operator? And we are, again, we're not going to reinvent the wheels. We're not going to write a Nefio version of Kill Builders and Operator SDK. We'll leverage whatever is out there that is great. Most likely, to be honest, Red Hat. So we'll definitely, the SDK, when we form the SDK team, one of the things we'll definitely explore is using Red Hat /CoreOS Operator SDK and see how we actually build on top of this, because it has a lot of nice features that we probably would be able to leverage. And so, as I said earlier, the one big difference is obviously it reconciles against a set of Nefio CLs, Nefio specific CLD CLs, and so that's the natural starting point. When you're using this SDK to build operators, the first thing you'll see is the reconcilability is already kind of implemented with this. Denny's wrote a very good libraries to parse NF deployments. We may make it much more piecemeal and much more field by field, and then you can include that if you are writing Go If you're not writing Go, we may have to write different libraries. I mean, it's a very long-term thing to support different languages, but then for now, let's be more realistic and probably just Go. So the operator would then, the generated operators would then be reconciled against, say, a UPF deployment, and then somehow we'll be able to get to your logic, the developer's logic, which is very vendor specific, based on say, oh, this is set an IP address on this interface, for example, and then you do a callback, do the work, and then come back and tell us that this is already done, and then we can update the status on the UPF deployment. And because of this, so this is what the operator SDK part of the Nephew SDK is doing. It would also be helping you because it wraps around a generic operator SDK. It would also allow you to create your vendor CLD extensions on there, and then we will be taking care of putting it on the package, and then load it as the dependencies before your NF package would be able to run, would be able to deploy. And yeah, so that goes to that one, the lifecycle management of your operator. So we'll make sure that we have something that we don't do today, that I'm hoping not hoping, we'll definitely have to do as part of this the SDK work. This is more of this is definitely squarely into SIG 2 work, which is when an operator runs, we'll have to check the compatibilities of the CLD that this tool supports at that moment, that is reconciled against this version of CLD versus what is being expected out of the specialization logic. So they will generate a fully defined UPF deployment, for example, and that obviously has to be a UPF deployment versions that agrees with what the operator sort of expected. So we'll make sure of that, and any updates and things that happens, there's a controller on Nephew system that needs to be tracking. And then in addition to that, because it also bundles the CLDs that get loaded from vendor extensions, we'll also have to make sure that whatever is generated on the management clusters would also be compatible between two sites. Would like to shout out that OM from Operator SDK does some of that. Nephew does have a different set of things that we have to do. So we'll definitely examine to see what things we can take advantage of OLM. But at the same time, I would definitely imagine there will be something that needs to be done on FEO. Again, this is not a design doc. This is a functional spec. So I'm not going to talk about how we can do it yet. It's just what are we going to do. And the next thing is how, if you have other things that is already working, that configures your network functions, how do you want to integrate? So one simple way to integrate is we will give you a proxy operators that is already reconciling the Nephew layouts, and then gRPC or some other messaging system would be great to use, because now we would be able to integrate with your existing software modules that are written in language other than Golang. We'll also be responsible for generating let's say gRPC server that you can link or just run as a module, just run as a pod on the workload clusters, and then somehow you make that callback hook as the developers with the network functions. And I think that actually may even be the first thing we do, because obviously this function, this way of doing things also would resolve function 1.1. So that may be a simple way to get folks kick-started. I mean, performance and everything we'll measure later forward, but then right now this seems like a simple things to address two functions at the same way. So what it does is basically operate a proxy that would be you either link or run it as a separate pod on a gRPC server, and then you somehow be able to create or talk to your own vendor specific network functions. Again, not a design point, but it's just one of the functionalities that we have to support. And we at the end, maybe we improve something vastly different. But then for now, this is one of the required functionalities that we want to, again, make it easier for network function vendors to get on board. And another major functionality that we have is packaging. We need a packaging tools inside this. For at the minimum, it has to obviously create an operator package after you generate an operator. And then again, because you are most likely, as I said, I would be surprised if anyone don't do it. a vendor-specific extension CLDs, then those things, the equivalents of those CLs would have to go into your network function package anyway. So we'll have same packaging tools that would generate the operator package as well as your NF package will be part of that tool. Or any additional things that you want to include, like Mongo or whatever, you can add that into. We'll use the same tools to make it easier for you to add those. And then one use case is every different personas will be able to start adding onto that packaging. That could be an interesting use case. Again, I don't want to definitively say this is a function that we have to support, but naturally it should. And the management cluster components. So this is very little that I write about because Vim obviously has a very nice SDK already addressing this. So we'll probably look to integrate that and make it easier if again, the idea of Nephew SDK is it onboards your network functions. So it's not just an operator. It's also, most likely, it also includes management cluster components. And we want developers to be able to look at that and say, oh, I am creating this experience for the users. And then I want to integrate with, I want to automate the mutation injections of your configurations also into this as part of that tool for onboarding. So you should be getting that. And again, you should be able to get that out of the Vim's existing tools. Unless you want to build a full Bloom controller, which may happen if you happens to want to use a controller to talk to external systems. Cap functions are not meant to do that. So you may want to build your own controller. So we'll see what the use case is. And I think Vim already talked about maybe he's able to create controllers too out of his tools. So that may be something to do. So Helm onboarding is obviously one of the easiest things, or the one thing that I repeatedly heard the vendors want to do for ease of actually onboarding their things, their network functions onto Nephiel. And it's a very big topic that we've been discussed to death almost for a while now in SIG1, cross SIG1, and some branches of SIG2. So I don't want to say that the tools would cover every single scenarios being put together, because it doesn't. But then if we are going to use Operator SDK from the Red Hat Operator SDK, again, we don't want to distinguish the terms, then it actually has a Helm operator embedded inside, or it works a certain way. So it may not cover as the way that you would actually imagine, because some of the suggestions, obviously, from many different vendors are making Helm like first-class citizens, making Helm much more featured. This is actually somewhat the other way around, which is just making CLDs off of your values.yaml files, and then runs the charge per operator. We don't do anything. If we use Operator SDK, we get that for free, so we expose that feature. This may or may not be what network function vendors want. We just want them to know that as part of these tools, we most likely have something like this that you can explore. But then again, us meaning this Google as someone who suggested doing this, do not want to dictate how you want to do your Helm integrations. And this tools is not the definitive way of saying that this is how you onboard Helm, but it is there because it's just part of something probably that we will leverage. And something that probably won't make out too is that's why it's such a short line, because it's kind of hand wavy now. The cloud service, the cloud horizontal pieces that you do want to integrate, it makes sense for the tools to allow you to see a bunch of template options that you want to do. So it ease the onboarding, not only for you, but also moving forward for users, that they'll see that they'll take the package and it's already also linked to packages that this is the way you put Prometheus, this is the way you put Istio, this is the way you do VPN services, this is the way you do some other things. That helps a lot. That's a great thing to have. And I would like to see that going. But then it probably isn't something we can do now too, or maybe we can explore. But then I see the community needs to do a lot more like cloud horizontal integrations to know what the best practice for Netfield before we get to the best practice and push that as part of the templates of the tools. And the last thing, and I already talked about that on SIG3, 2 days ago, is that obviously when you are creating SDK tools, that is actually hinged on the fact that it has to be operating on a set of APIs exposed by the project. We would have to give you conformance tests to ensure that when you're done with your operators, it conforms to this version of the CRDs. So there's some discussions that we already kicked off on SIG3 about what kind of framework and what kind of tools we can use and integrate that into their tools. And because you're writing an operator, and because we're so underfunded as a project, we don't have any hardware for you to use. So one thing that may happen is we'll also publish a set of behavioral tests as part of this particular release. And then you can go ahead and test it on the operator and make sure that it works. And then you can publish that on your website or publish that on Nefio. And that would come as part of, well, it comes as part of the published test case, but then the tools would help you, execute a script or something. So, and that's basically what I have for the functional, the list of function specifications. It is a function descriptions. Any questions?
So, Stephen, I'm coming very cold for this for after a while. So question to both you and Tal. So is the decision that we are using the operator SDK?
No, it's not about decision. No. So again, I try to make this like a functional things. So hopefully the community will have a understanding and consensus. Obviously, consensus is more important. That we are building towards something that would do this set of stuff. I'm honestly, if you ask me or Tal, we are leaning towards, at least for sure, the team, whatever team we form for the SDK, will explore the operator SDK. I think Alexis wrote something on the R2 requirement doc from SIG1, and then I think Daniel from Bell also seconded that, which is don't reinvent the wheel, which absolutely agree. And then they also recommended using operator SDK, and we would love to do that. But then we have to explore and see the feasibility. We'll love to use it, absolutely.
Thanks.
I may have a quick. Maybe I'm jumping the line. Sorry.
No one raised their hand, so go ahead.
No, go ahead, Alex.
Oh, great. Sorry, I spoke too fast. We talk a lot about the operator SDK, but I mean, how many operators do we really want to create for Nefio? Because do we want to create? And maybe I missed that. I know we have created a bunch of Kubernetes controllers.
So this is a tool. So what we're asking is, so the idea of a SDK, the Nefio SDK, is to bring vendors on board to Nefio. So again, the operator part is one major part. It's not the only part. So the idea is, even if all the parts are already in place, the idea is still creating an SDK that integrate all this part. So the developers of those NF vendors and so on would be able to take that as a one-stop, looking at that and say, oh, I know exactly what I have to do. And then when I do this set of processes, I already created all the things that I needed to onboard Nefio for this particular version. So that's the idea. So each, we're hoping all the network function vendors and other projects on an open source project would be interested to go on to jump on board to Nefio as they find more and more about Nefio being useful, hopefully. And this whole SDK idea is just to get them on board easier.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
We're not creating new operators. We may do that anyway just to test the SDK, but the whole point is we're addressing getting vendors on board easier, because obviously something we get feedback on is how you write something seems kind of simple, but then if you want to onboard Nefio, you have to write an operator, you have to write scap functions, write all kinds of stuff. Seems to be kind of difficult. So we want to make sure that experience is as easy as possible. I wouldn't say as easy as other mechanisms.
Yeah, no, and this is going to be even more true as we start thinking about network function provisioning. So how do we get these Yang and are able to do the provisioning? And maybe we're going to have some ways to bootstrap that with that operator SDK for Nefio.
You're right.
So it might have a broader
so it's
scope in the long
beyond
term.
just operator. So be a bunch of other things.
Correct. Okay, thank you.
Tao's next. Go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick point that beyond so as as Stephen is really emphasizing a lot here, this is a functional spec. So we are getting into some hints about possible implementations here, but that's not the main part, right? I'll add that we've discussed a lot of different implementations internally, and we'll share some more actual documents pretty soon about that. One issue to put kind of on the table is, yes, operator SDK is a very obvious possible path, but if you look at the contribution coming soon for open air interface, Sagar did really amazing work creating operators in Python, written in Python based on the KOPF SDK, which is 100% Python. Does it have advantages? Sure. Is it as supported as Operator SDK? No. Right. So as Bala said, has this been decided? No, nothing has been decided. I think there's still actually quite a lot of research we have to do to understand what the best experience would be. And a lot of this research is actual feedback from vendors in terms of their own experiences in onboarding. Right. We do hear a lot that actually learning Go is an obstacle, right? A lot of people doing this packaging work are engineers or networks, right? They're not necessarily familiar with the Go language or use Go for anything other than something like this, integration with Kubernetes. So a lot of questions are still hanging here, and there's more to come, We wanted to separate our contributions because not to bombard everybody with so much information at once. Let's start with this understanding. I think this document is very important in understanding what we expect this SDK to do. And if we have an understanding, or at least have a topic for conversation, we can move on to talking about, I think, implementations. Yeah, that's it. Thank
you. Sandeep?
Yeah, thank you. Just quick clarification, actually. So when we come into the Nephew world, right? Like ultimately the goal, this is for my understanding, please correct me if I'm wrong, that ultimately the goal is to have the life cycle of a NF being managed by the operator. Is it?
Oh no. So okay, yes. The operator should manage that, and then the operator is is the vendor implementations. The SDK is just to get you on board.
Yes. So vendor still, all of the vendor, right, have to write their operator, have to decide how they want to deploy their NFs, how they want to control the NFs, right? For example, very simple case.
One would imagine, yes.
One would imagine. And for example,
the difference is big enough that I would definitely think that each vendor should have their own. In fact, each vendor they have their own per each NF even.
Right. So ultimately, that's the idea, right? Like then only we can say that. Okay, yeah. Then only we can say that you are sort of nephew compliance in some other terms, like quote unquote, right? And so that's the ultimate goal, right? So we have to move to the operator world and to gain the benefits of what nephew is offering, isn't it? Correct?
Yes.
So this is actually what I wanted to say. So I think I'm next anyway. So if I can respond to that, I think I would say not. I wouldn't give that an unqualified yes. I'd say yes and no. And I think that this comes down to operators should be used where they add value, and Kubernetes primitives should be used where they're sufficient. And so if you're talking about a simple, I know like some of the network functions in the control plane, as I understand it, are essentially HTTP services. Like it may not be necessary to build an operator to manage the lifecycle of what's effectively a stateless service because it puts its state in MongoDB or somewhere else, right? So the Kubernetes primitives that are already out there might be sufficient, or even for things like that MongoDB server, like stateful set may be sufficient. So I think operators are super important when there's a lot of complexity around how you manage the individual function and maybe or a set of functions that need some sequencing or whatever. But and they'll be necessary for managing the configuration of those functions, like Alexi was talking about, right? That provisioning process. But for lifecycle management of the pods, when the Kubernetes primitives are sufficient, I don't think we should do anything other than use them. I think so, and we may find that we can build that there are certain common patterns that network function vendors are seeing that we can build an FEO workload controller, right? Kubernetes has stateful sets, it has deployments, it has daemon sets. Those are all workload controllers that are for generic purposes. There may be patterns that are appropriate in this domain that we can build that are part of Nephew that avoid operators or vendors having to build operators for some subset of the network function. So in that sense, I would say a qualified yes, Sandeep. Like it's likely that there will be some operators, but I think we should minimize the number of custom operators people need to build by building things into the platform.
Okay. So just follow up. I'll just lower my hand. Just a minute. Yeah. So the follow up is like, okay. So you're saying that there can be a scenarios in NFOs where we don't have to build any operator, is it? And our NFs can be deployed. Are you saying that?
Sure. Yeah, sure. If the Kubernetes primitives are sufficient to manage your network function,
Right.
then there's no reason why you need an operator.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. In that case, what is the advantage of Nephew ecosystem which I can take? Is it the on the go, on the demand, the infrastructure creation for my specific NF or anything else?
So in that case, it's this. So this gets back to this shift left versus shift right. So operator is actually a shift right, whereas like things you do in the management cluster are shift left. So like we can do neither of these is sufficient to solve the problem, right? We need both. So there are things we're doing within the management cluster, for example, with all of the package specialization functionality. All of that applies whether the ultimate resources that delivered to the workload cluster are a CR for an operator or are just a deployment. So things like all of the processing around integration with the VLAN allocation and IPAM allocation and whatever else we come up with in the next coming releases around integrations on that package specialization side apply regardless of the use of an operator or not on the workload cluster. So you leverage by using the APIs that Nephew provides, like IP claim, you are all of a sudden enabling integration with any Nephew system that maybe uses an IP from your customer's bespoke IPAM system or uses an IP from some vendor or somebody fills it into a ticket, right? All of those can work and the same package can work for all of those scenarios. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay, so there are something which we can take advantage regardless of the operator being created or not using, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So for just follow up last question, I think already we are time up. So just to make sure that, like in the sense, suppose a vendor has all these things deployed properly, like using Helm and all those things, everything is running fine. So, and if he doesn't have to create operator, right? So what are the main use cases, right? Without operator, like I vendor should come to Nephew to take advantage of Nephew. It's a very, very primitive question. Sorry if I'm asking too late, right?
Yeah, we're over. I'm not sure I followed the question. Liam's got his hand up and we're over time. I don't know. Can we?
Yeah, maybe this was
we probably want Liam to talk. Yeah,
Liam, please.
Hands up for a while.
Just what? This is probably what something that came up yesterday on the when we were talking about Helm and Flux and how much of operations do you have to get to be Nephew compliant or not. And we had a bit of a discussion of this yesterday at the SIG 1 work group 4. So maybe it's something that we can postpone to next week and have a discussion on it. Or maybe have a discussion on the
maybe let's put it
on Slack, because it's a topic that interests me as well. But I really have to go now.
Okay, yeah. Reach out on Slack, and if we need to discuss it more in the next meeting, that works too. But from a NFVO compliance point of view, eventually we'll have to have a conformance suite that basically you can take a package and you can throw it at that conformance suite, and it can say whether that vendor package is NFVO compliant. So that's going to have a lot of implications as far as things I was talking about earlier, like you can rely on certain policy being there in NFVO as an NFVO vendor versus an NFVO provider versus a consumer. What's the contract between those two? So anyway, we are past time. So thank you, everybody. Great discussion, and let's follow up on Slack. And Bala, if you can stay on for a minute, and anybody else can drop off, because I want to ask you if you are interested in continuing as the release manager for R2.
Sure. Can stay on. Yeah. So is that the question you wanted? Yes.
That's the question. Yeah.
Answer to yes. Yes. Yeah.
That's why.
Okay.
That's why we keep the recording on, so to make sure that when you say yes, it will be recorded.
Good. Yes. Good point, Stephen. So
yeah, actually, I was going to reach out to you this week, John. I know, so for various reasons. Yeah, I was going to reach out to you. I want to get back to that role, and I wanted some of your help because I lost a bit of context in terms of the actual scope for the release, etc. So I was going to reach out to you.
A lot of it's not defined. So yeah, I can. Let me check my calendar. Do you have time right now, or?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So let me share. Let me go back and share this again. So what we talked about early in the meeting is, So I think we need to do a few things. We need to form a release team. So I was hoping you could continue as the lead there. Simon's also interested in participating. The scope for the project. So what I did right now is I created an R2 project board, and I basically just carried over all of the things.
I saw that one. Yeah.
Okay. And then I added in all the things we talked about a couple of weeks ago, except for the things that are like things of substance, but that aren't gaps or continuations or known things from this SIG, but are the things that we want, those big themes from SIG 1. I didn't add those in because I don't know what they are yet. So we had a little bit of a discussion, and that's underway. I'm hoping the SIGNet Arch is supposed to finalize that, and then we're going to have to look at it, and we're going to have to see what we think is reasonable. What our earlier discussion was that likely the scope of R2 is going to be things we already know about, plus exploration of or prototyping of some of the things that SIG1 wants to do, because we don't necessarily know how to do them yet, or what the implications of them all are yet. So we'll have to evaluate that as it gets formed, whether there's things we can actually deliver as core functionality or whether it's really going to be primarily prototyping. But we expect R2 to be kind of a more of a gap filling release as opposed to a substantial functionality release, and also take that time to explore some of these new requirements. So that's what my understanding of the scope is. The other point that the release team will need to figure out is, and this can't really happen until after we understand that scope better, is do we continue with the sub-projects we have? Do we disband those and form new sub-projects? Do we do it all as one? Like, all of that is up in the air. And then, of course, the schedule, figuring out the sprints, figuring out the release date. So these are the kind of things, I would hope that the release team could, take the lead on. Or you could take the lead.
Sure. Yeah. Makes sense. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks.
So yeah, let me know if you have any.
The theme of the release most likely, I mean, my son, just summarize my understanding, is continue the same thing and wait. We're waiting for obviously the SIG-1 inputs, and then mostly we'll be doing a lot of prototyping, proof of concept.
Yeah, I think we want to close gaps and address some tech debt, and then maybe, and then there's like the question of, are there capabilities we could demonstrate with our existing platform that we have yet to demonstrate? That's one potential thing we can do. And then there's the question of, like, yes, addressing new use cases or areas of functionality coming out of SIG-1. And that's, still a little bit up in the air.
Yeah, ORAN seems to be one. I don't know whether that's part of.
Yeah, that's apparently one they're talking about a lot.
Yeah.
And that has certain implications, right? Like, what do we do? How do we test? How do we, like I would think the scalability, like, there's a bunch of implications of that. So, like, we'll have to have all those discussions. But,
okay, and then November date is fixed now in the mid August, October, like almost we have 3 months, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. And then we should figure out how far we have to back that up to have time to harden it or whatever we need to do. Like, we should look at our experience last time. We had to ask for an extra month. Like,
Yeah,
we should try
I mean, November doesn't seem that realistic.
Well,
unless the only thing we do is like a 1.1 type thing where we take all the tech debts, things that we didn't do for 1.0, and just do those, and that becomes.
That's kind of what I expect. We're gonna close some gaps, and we're gonna tighten some things up, and we're gonna maybe demonstrate some essentially already existing capabilities or improvements to existing capabilities, and we're gonna explore how we would do the bigger things. I don't see in this time frame it very likely that we're gonna deliver a bunch of new functionality.
Yeah,
and I think that's okay.
Yeah, part of that is also other things that is coming to my mind is tightening up and mostly making our documentation more professional.
Yes. Yes.
So folks from Nokia has reaching out to me, probably have some ideas. Probably we can bring them to the fold here. I think that's definitely one thing. The other thing is, that Rado is working on making our CI/CD more tightened up as well, such as making the test enabled as a part of PR process. I mean to say end-to-end test, not the unit tests. Things like that. I think probably we can do all those things as a part of. We can tighten the ship, like you said, John, in various aspects.
Yeah, and we should add more test cases too, right?
Yes.
Yeah, for sure. And probably we need a way. We're getting into SIG release stuff now, but we need a way to, like, not spin up a whole environment every time, because that takes a substantial amount of time. To have clusters running and dole out tests to them. But anyway, that's a totally different topic. So so Bala, take a look. I'm glad to hear your.
Well, I mean, technically, the entire release team thing is 6.3 territory, but anyway.
Exactly. So let's take time to get your context and reach out to me on Slack anytime, and we'll go from there.
Yeah.
So when do we actually, are we already sprinting, John, or are we gonna sprint from next week?
We haven't really been doing that. I mean, people are welcome to pick things off the board and just work on them. There's nothing to stop people, but the board right now is just backlog. And
we haven't done like the calculations from November backwards, and then let's say 6 sprints or whatever, and then starting it. No, we haven't done that. That's what we did last time, but we haven't done it this time.
Yeah, okay. But we'll start.
Last time we went from 6 to like 9 sprints anyway, so whatever.
Yeah. So we will.
And that, once we do that, Bala, like, we'll probably see how little time we actually have.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Cool. I'll take a look, John, and then I'll reach out to both of you, and then we'll chart out some plan of action.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
We'll see everybody later. Bye.
Cool. Thank you so
Bye.
much. Take care. Bye bye. Yeah.